So here's tonight's tale. It comes from Kath. Kath, thank you very much for today's confession, which is topical, as you're about to find out. Simon and the Collective. It's always about this time of year, with the sun shining, so many global sporting events taking place. I am transported back several decades. We're going back to 1979, pretty much to when darts
yeah, absolutely bang on.
relied on to do some hits on the telly. Having left school with no idea what I wanted to do in life, it made perfect sense to take over the job my older sister had just finished. So as she left France and returned to Scotland, I went off to France to work as an au pair, living with the family she'd been staying with. Life was idyllic. I lived in a large, sprawling farmhouse really deep in the French countryside. It was such a remote little village that only one bus passed through it one day a week. I came to know everyone in the village, and we very rarely had any visitors from outside, as it really wasn't on any tourist map. We had no shops. There was a little bakery in the next village, which I could reach in about 20 minutes on an ancient bike that was in one of the outhouses. It took me quite a while to master it. Getting on involved me leaning the bike against a wall, then climbing the wall and swiftly-ish taking off. I'm 5 foot and a little bit, says Kath. This bike was not only from the Stone Age, but also designed for a giant. The only way I could get on it was to tip the bike and myself sideways and hope for the best. I persevered, however, and often would freewheel down the steep hill to the next village. I wouldn't even attempt the hill climb on the way back, so I just pushed it slowly. Over time, I prided myself on discovering hitherto unknown paths and shortcuts. The most exciting discovery being the little overgrown path that I could take, which would take me out about a quarter of the way up the hill. I would then do my ritual of tipping off and walking the rest of the way up the hill to my village. One day I'd been out visiting a friend and was heading back home. The sun was shining and my legs were starting to ache. I didn't have too long to go, though, as I had already reached my secret pathway and only had to get to the end of it before climbing off the bike and walking up the hill. I'd already decided I would have a little rest at the bottom of the hill when I noticed an elderly couple sitting by the end of the path with a small picnic. What a weird place to come for a picnic, I thought, followed by the fact that I would now have to cycle past them and round the corner onto the hill and out of sight before my disembarking ritual could commence, because it was rather embarrassing, as I have explained. So, Simon, I was slightly put out by this couple daring to picnic near my remote village. You can imagine how I felt then when I rounded the path onto the hill and discovered about 600 people lining both sides of the hill, picnic tables everywhere, wine, cheese, tablecloths. It wasn't only very puzzling, but when at the sight of me and my rust bucket, they started clapping and cheering and shouting, "Allez, allez!" It was with a heavy heart and even heavier legs that I realised there was no way I could tip myself off this bike. I'd have to attempt something I'd never achieved before and cycle up to the top of the dreaded hill. So I pushed on and upwards, being cheered all the way. Excuse me. With about 50 metres or so left to climb, the cheers suddenly became deafening. Wow, I thought, they're really enjoying this, unlike me. It was then I realised and I heard the unmistakable roar of a car's engine. Great, I thought, bad enough that all these people are now here. Now I've got to contend with a car too. And how dare they start beeping at me? This is my private road. A quick look behind and it all became horribly clear. This was not just any old car. The correct term for this particular one on that particular day was, I now know, the lead car. You see, because I had used little hidden roads and paths to reach my destination, it meant that I'd avoided all the closed road signs and, quite by accident, had seemingly become an extra and unsubscribed participant in that year's Bourgogne stage of the Tour de France. With a strength that probably came from sheer embarrassment, my little legs took on a life of their own. Excuse me, as I had to get to the top of the hill, round the corner and into the farmhouse courtyard before the incensed car driver reached me. Amazingly, I managed it. It did cross my mind to demand a yellow jumper, as I'd surely earned it, but thought best to just lie low, and lie low I did. So I seek forgiveness, not from the crowds who had come to see the elite cyclists, as they still managed to see them. I got an added bonus when I appeared. I can understand the trouble the lead car driver would have gotten into had I not managed my super sprint to finish. That would have been a catastrophe had the real cyclists caught up with me, but they didn't, so no harm done. Where I perhaps should seek forgiveness is from my dad, himself an elite cyclist in his younger days, who competed in many similar events around Europe. One of his many titles, one was the Scottish uphill champion. Had I listened a bit more to him about cycling techniques, I would probably have reached the top of the hill far quicker. Well, imagine that. Excuse me again. Kath.
You all right?
Yeah. So
Not really.
Kath finds herself at the head of the Tour de France and desperately trying to get out of the way on an old rust bucket, and she's only 5 foot. Young Joe.
Initially, I was getting images of Call Me By Your Name when you started to tell that story for some bizarre reason, it being in France and cycles and everything. There's nothing to forgive here, just enormous respect for climbing up the hill on your bike, and you absolutely deserved a yellow shirt at the end of it, and you were very much, I think, an uphill champion. So I just give you all the respect, and I think you have nothing to be sorry or to forgive.
Okay, what do you say, Bobby Pryor?
Well, here's the thing.
Moral compass of the nation.
The problem
What
is,
did
of
she
course,
do wrong?
I understand. She won the hill climb. She deserves the yellow jersey. In fact, though, Kath, I imagine your dad, like my dad, would be very, very cross with you. My dad is a cyclist. One of the things he used to get really cross about, and was brilliant to watch him get cross at, was people getting in the way of the cyclist. So you were potential getting in the way of the trip, because actually the impact is huge if someone is on that course and brings down, the peloton. That's huge. So I'm going to say, in memory of my dad, Kath, you are not forgetting.